there is a movement out there right now that wants to say that men and women are completely identical, that there's no difference there. And it's true. Women can do whatever they want. Men can do whatever they want, generally, right? I believe in equality of opportunity. But looking at the demographics of this channel, I'll tell you, 98% of the people who view my videos are young or middle-aged men. Why is that? Well, it's probably pretty typical for most gaming videos, because that's the genre we're talking about. Pretty much it's directed at gamers. Like, this channel is aiming to be a multi-topic channel, just talking about all kinds of different stuff, whatever's on my mind. But ultimately, my audience that I'm trying to reach out to is gamers, because that's the category that I put myself into. I like playing games. I like RPGs. I'm interested in that sort of a thing. And so I'm reaching out to kind of the audience that's interested in that as well. And it turns out, even though I'm not trying to reach out to guys, most of the viewers on this channel are guys. And if you look at other channels that I enjoy, like, for example, Asmongold is a great example, probably a majority of his viewers are also guys. It's just kind of the way it goes. If you look at statistics to see what is the gender gap in MMOs, you'll see that overall it's probably like a 3-to-1 male to female ratio. There are some games that have more females than males, but that's very rare. Usually it's always going to be more guys than girls, and that might skew a little bit more to where it's closer to a 50-50 in a few games. Like Final Fantasy XIV, Elder Scrolls Online probably are among the more balanced populations when it comes to the percentage of women who are playing the game. And a big part of why that is because those are games that offer something for everybody. Like in Elder Scrolls Online, you could be a person who does PvP in Cyrodiil. You could also be somebody who just works on decorating houses. So there's something for every type of player. You could be a PvE player or a PvP player. You could be a person who focuses on combat, or a person who focuses on something that's more chill and cozy. You could focus on the lore, or you could play the game without any interest in learning the lore at all. But ultimately, women are more likely to play games that are focused on fantasy and creativity, while men are more likely to play games that are focused on combat and competition. That's just how it works. And if you want to have a good balanced community, you really need to have a game that offers a balanced mix of both. And when I look at the community of Elder Scrolls Online, I think it's interesting how that's one of the big draws. It's one of the big reasons why I like the game, because it's balanced. You get that sense of respect in the community. You just feel like you're playing with people from all different walks of life, all different ages, all different genders. There may be some imbalance in there, but overall, compared to, for example, let's say Albion Online or EVE Online, very toxic PvP, full loot, drop on death games, and you get in there, you start playing those games, and you start realizing, you know what, probably every single person playing this entire game is a guy. Because they're just toxic as hell, and, you know, that's the environment that type of game engenders and encourages. I'm not saying it's a bad game, because there's a lot of really cool things about those games, but the reality is they do not make themselves conducive to a balanced community. And when you don't have balance, and then you start looking at a game that prioritizes social interaction, what do you get? when you have an imbalanced type of interaction between players. Think about an all guys dormitory. What kind of things happen in there? Or you have guys in the military and they're just around other guys. Like, what kind of conversations happen there? What kind of social structure exists? There's benefits, but it's not wholesome in the way that you'd have if you had a mixed community that was sensitive to the needs of everyone. And that's also true on the other side, because when you have a society that's focused just on women's issues at the expense of a male perspective, then that also can be its own variety of kind of a passive toxicity. You know, I don't necessarily want to play The Sims or Coral Island or some of those super cozy games. I like them. I kind of like them, but they don't stick to me. I kind of want some of that element of seeing a number go up and having a little bit of competition and having a little bit of combat in a game. You know, I like the idea of a cozy game, but really it doesn't appeal to me as much. And I also don't like a game that's super competitive to where there's not anything other than just competition for the sake of competition. And that's kind of true in life too. I like the balance, but if you don't have the balance, you know, ultimately I'd rather play a peaceful, cozy game probably than a try-hard game that's going to be really stressful, really toxic, filled with a lot of really disrespectful people, right? So all of this I'm saying to lead up to a point I'm getting at, and I think we need to talk about it because it's important. You know, the Wall Street Journal recently put out a video talking about how young men are less likely to vote than young women. And young men are also more inclined to lean conservative by a very big margin than young women. So in a time when political elections are very close, when there's a lot of issues on the table, especially big issues that are related to peace and security in the world, the economy, stuff like that, we have potentially a pivot where young men are more interested in conservative values than ever before. And they're also not necessarily as likely to vote. And I think it's very important that we talk about the importance of participating in the political process. And that doesn't mean that I'm telling you how you should vote, but I think when we acknowledge the fact that probably most of the people who are going to see this video are men, the real ask is, you know, what are you doing? Are you going to get out there and vote? Are you going to exercise your voice? Because it matters. And probably more now than ever, it makes a difference. Because margins are very slim. And all it takes is a few guys deciding, you know what, I am going to get out there and exercise my right to vote. You got to stand up for yourself. And like I said, ideally we should live in a world which is sensitive to the needs of all people equally. Identity politics is not the way to go. We should focus on issues that we all agree are important. the things that we can all stand behind and be united over. Those are the things that we should talk about and make front and center. But as it is, it seems like we've started to have a little bit of this attitude of men versus women. And there's a toxicity, because I think that there's an attitude that because women have been oppressed in the past, therefore every issue that they bring up automatically should be given to them, and they aren't capable of doing any wrong. Now, that's not all women by no measure, but it's an underlying sentiment that is existing in our society, that we should just kind of apologize for our existence. And that's not right. You know, there's a trend going on. I think this is a good way to illustrate what I'm trying to say. There's a trend going on where some women will go into the supermarket and take off their panties and throw them into the fresh meat side counter or something like that, right? They take their panties off and they leave them there, and they video themselves doing this so that they can kind of create a response on social media over this. And people will watch that and they'll say, oh my goodness, they shouldn't do that, right? Like that's kind of disgusting, right? Well, okay. But let's just imagine, okay? Imagine if a guy went in to the grocery store, took off his shorts, took his undies off, and threw them into the produce department. What would the women have to say about that? They would be so outraged. Like, it wouldn't just be oh, haha, that's disgusting. It would be like, take this guy off and send him away to go to prison for life, right? Because he's a total perverted freak. Like, that's probably the kind of messaging that would be out there. And that's kind of the point I'm getting at. We're in a situation where identity politics surrounding things like gender and other issues of that nature have gotten to the point where if women do something that's wrong, it's not really that bad because they are fundamentally good on some level. So even if they do something bad, it's just like kind of a once-off slap the wrist at most. But if guys do something pretty much identical, they are pretty much on the list to be permanently banned from society. It's basically just like an unfair moderation situation where one person can do something and get away with it, and they got like a 24-hour ban. Somebody else did the same thing, and they get a total ban for life. Like, how fair is that? And we see that sometimes. So we've gotten more polarized, and we know that there's a situation going on where we need young people to have a voice, and we need young men to have a voice. And I think anybody who's underrepresented, anyone who's underrepresented needs to advocate for themselves. That's just the bottom line. And when something gets a little bit too far off of center, whoever's on the losing side needs to step up and go to bat. And I think for a lot of men, it's time to stand up. It's time to say, I am going to have a voice if I haven't had a voice before. just the same way as you would say that women should have a voice if they didn't have a voice, if they were not given empowerment. It's like playing ping pong. The game doesn't work if one side of the table never hits back. So where am I going with all this? Well, I guess I'm just saying times are changing, and if you sat on the sidelines and you weren't super concerned about having a voice when it's time for election, when it's time to vote for your representatives in your home state, whatever it might be, if you're kind of on the fence, you ought to take into consideration that it's not a huge imposition for you to cast your vote. Now, if you want to vote for a Democrat, then go for it, right? Like I 100% believe in a two-party system. But this is not the time for people to just sit on the sidelines and not be part of the sample size. And that's a real risk, that we wind up having permanent decisions made because of people who just didn't have anything to say at all. And then people will say, oh well, that's just the democratic process happening. Well, that's fair, but it's not the democratic process happening the way it should if a lot of us choose to just stay home behind our screens and we don't want to actually take the time to say what we think, or to have a genuine conversation about something, or to raise up our voice and speak up when we think something's wrong, or we just don't cast our vote at all. So vote your conscience, but stand up for yourself. And when it's time to vote, I would encourage everyone, make this the time when you choose to say something. And I think when we look over our lives, when we look at all the opportunities we've had, you never really look back and say with regret that you wish you wouldn't have spoke up when you had the opportunity, one way or the other, to say what you believe. But I think there are a lot of us who are just kind of neutral. A lot of us who just kind of hang out. Maybe we have an opinion, but we figure it's not our battle to fight. And then other people are making decisions that ultimately affect our lives. So, get involved. Cast your vote. Make an effort to be heard. Because the people who shout the loudest aren't necessarily the only people who have an opinion. And I think all of us need to remember that even if it feels like none of us really make too much of a difference, when you add everybody together in the pot, everybody has something that deserves to be heard. As always, good luck on your adventure. Till next time. Thanks.